Hello, I'm Liz Van Vliet, and welcome to the Assist with Impact podcast. Join me as I explore the competencies and capabilities that allow you to assist with impact. I'll be sharing practical tips, strategies, and insights that will help you move beyond what I call the order taker zone and be that little hinge that can swing big doors. If you're ready to be more proactive and have more impact in your role, then this is the place for you. Let's get started with the episode. Well, hello, my lovely listener. I'm back with another solo episode. I figured that when I was actually having a look at my episodes this year, I have actually done a lot of interviews, and what I used to find I loved doing with the podcast was using it as a way to deliver effectively some free training for you, my lovely listener. And I still want to make sure that I'm doing that. So I hope you don't mind that I'm popping in with another solo episode, because I really do want to make sure that I've got a lot of listeners that are fairly new to the podcast. And I just want to be really clear that this podcast is definitely about bringing you the stories of indispensable, invaluable, exceptional assistants. But it's also a way for me to share tips, tactics, practical and tactical ways for you to be able to elevate your effectiveness and assist with impact. And so that is why this week I've decided to do another solo episode focusing on another aspect of how you can do that. But before I get into that, I want to tell you that I am very excited about some things that I have coming up. One is that as I sit here doing this podcast recording, I am starting to pack my bag, and I'm looking around me and I have a bunch of gift items that I am packing in my bag, because I am winging my way to Ottawa in Canada later this week, because I'm delivering some training for the wonderful assistants at the Bank of Canada. So I'm very excited about that, and I will be posting all over my socials while I'm there, so you'll get to see me in beautiful Ottawa. I may even run into Canada's very attractive and currently, I think, available Prime Minister. But I shouldn't say that too loud. Actually, I can say that quite loud, because my own Canadian husband is actually not home at the moment. So anyway, I have my own very good-looking Canadian. I don't need Justin Trudeau. Anyway, moving on. I also wanted to let my Antipodean listeners know, that's Australia and New Zealand listeners, for those of you that don't know that term, that I am very excited about doing a coast-to-coast, country-to-country tour, delivering a one-day training program in partnership with Event Edge that is coming up in October. So I will be getting back from Canada, getting over my jet lag, and then jumping on planes, going planes, trains, and automobiles. There won't be trains, actually. There'll be just planes and cars, Ubers and taxis. Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, Wellington, and Auckland. So I will put the link in the show notes if you are looking to get some Liz in your life and do my one-day signature program that I've developed for Event Edge, then this is your way to do that if you are in Australia and New Zealand. And then finally, I would like to ask a favour of you, my lovely listener. I would love it if you would take the time to hit the ratings and reviews button in whatever, particularly if you're listening in Apple Podcasts. This is really where the rubber hits the road for me. I would love it if you could leave a rating and review for the Assist with Impact podcast. It would make a really big difference to how well my podcast shows up, because compared to when I first started podcasting, when I was pretty much the only podcast out there for executive assistants at the time when I started podcasting, there was me and Be the Ultimate Assistant with Bonnie and Vicky Sokol Evans, Bonnie Lou Craman and Vicky Sokol Evans. And I am the OG, people. I have been in this game for over 7 years now, but I don't ask for ratings and reviews. So I'm making a point of it. If you could leave me a rating and review, that would be really fantastic. So let's move on to the topic of today's episode. It's all about 5 ways for you to ensure that your invisible work is visible. So if you're like most assistants, you will know how it feels to be that proverbial iceberg, where it's only the little top of you that is visible to everyone else and sitting above the surface. And everything that you actually do, your colleagues and often your manager, your leader, may not actually see the work that you do. So your work is invisible in a lot of cases. And, there is a reason why, assistants, one of the things I love about the assistant role is the way that it is such a service-oriented role. So there is, on one hand, there is nothing wrong with that. But on the other hand, that is actually doing you a disservice. And I want you to think about these 5 ways that you can change that. So the first way, I'm going to go straight to the heart of it, is aligning your tasks with organizational goals. Now, I'm going to give you a pointer to an episode 110, where I talked about this idea of connecting your outputs to outcomes and impacts. Now, that is a model that I use in my training, and it's really important for you to get clear on how your outputs, the things you do as an EA, as an assistant, generate business organizational outcomes. So the outputs are the things you do. And what I get people to do when they're training with me, in my training workshops, in my day's training, in my 2-day programs, is I have an activity where I get you to write down, just do a brain dump of the outputs that you're responsible for. But then I want you to then explain why that thing is important and how it contributes to the business, because that is your big picture thinking. So your outcomes, when I'm talking about tying it to outcomes are what your manager, your leader, your team are driving towards. They might be a revenue goal. They might be, a customer satisfaction goal. They might be, project-based goals. But that is the thing that at a team level, at a department level, your leader is driving towards. Then the impacts are what the organization is seeking to deliver. So I get you to, I want you to think about that. I want you to write down for your organization, what is it, the outcome? What are the outcomes that your manager is driving towards? What are the impacts that your organization is driving towards? And how does what you do align with those things? So that's thinking about how you influence. How do you progress that thing, that outcome and that impact? How do you influence it? How do you up-level it? What are the ways that your role extends outward? What are all the ways you touch other parts of the business, other stakeholders, internal and external, to advance those outcomes and impacts? So what possibilities do you, in your role, in the things you're doing, progress? Bottom line is that it's about ensuring and keep being really mindful that every task you take on is necessary and that it aligns with your organization's strategic goals and objectives. Because the further removed a task is from those outcomes and impacts, the strategy of the business, the less likely it will be seen as worthwhile, rewardable, valuable. I hope that makes sense. Now, second thing you can do to ensure that your invisible work is visible is practice using your voice. You know, as an assistant, your work sometimes it's not visible to many people other than your manager, your executive, and maybe some people, in your team. So to make your work more visible, you need to start speaking up. So one way you can do that is to speak up in team meetings. So share your work and some of the ways that you connect the dots between those outcomes and impacts. Share your work and how it impacts your exec, the team, and the organization. So if you're sitting in a team meeting and everybody else has the space to talk about what they're doing, why don't you? I want you to think about that. Do you have a voice in team meetings at the moment? And if not, how can you change that? How can you claim your space? The next way, number 3, that I want you to think about is something that's very close to my heart, which is cultivating that strong relationship with your executive. So in my growth zones, my Linchpin model growth zones, it's all about leader insights. And building that strong relationship is so important because they should be your biggest advocate. They should being the operative word, the value that you bring and how your work contributes. But sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're too wrapped up in their own stuff. Sometimes they're just not having it made visible to them, the contribution that you're making. So regularly communicating with them about what you do, how you're supporting them, how you're being both a thermostat and a thermometer, for example, taking the temperature and setting the temperature for them. And I always encourage assistants, if they're not already doing it, to provide your leader, your exec, with a weekly update of what you've done that is aligned to progressing their top strategic objectives. So what are their big three? What are their key outcomes that they're driving towards? How have you enabled that for them in that given week? Bullet point is fine. It's tying those outputs to outcomes and impacts. Number 4 is one that I know can be really hard when you're an assistant, and it's the idea of not saying yes to things that are invisible tasks. So don't immediately put your hand up or say yes for non-promotional tasks. Joe Miller, my mate Joe Miller, who wrote the book that I'm always rabbiting on about in my training, which is, her leadership book, is always talking about this as the Achilles heel for particularly women, volunteering for non-promotional tasks. So many of us suffer from the people-pleasing disorder, and we want to be helpful, and we associate our being helpful with being valued. But if you're often asked to take on invisible work, just take on more and more invisible work, think about not saying yes immediately. Think about whether or not that task or that responsibility really aligns with your goals and really is within your boundaries before you agree to take on the task. And one of the things that I always talk about in my training is keeping in mind the idea of a positive no. The idea that you're saying no to a thing, not a person. It's a mindset shift. And it helps you zoom out from the voice in your head that is all about the consequences of saying no. The stuff that your head is telling you, they won't think I'm a team player if I say no. Or they won't think I'm committed. Or they won't think I'm good at my job. And think about it more in terms of it just doesn't work for me. There's no judgment. The thing, just doesn't work for me. And number 5, my final one, is to do the opposite. Instead of volunteering for the things that are just, not visible, look for the high visibility projects. Look for opportunities. Again, when we're thinking about the Linchpin model and the growth zones, I talk about organizational insights. So thinking about those outcomes and impacts, thinking about what is something that you could get involved in that is tied to a strategic outcome or impact. So, there is absolutely opportunity for you to stretch yourself, to develop yourself by taking on more, other projects. But it's got to be the right project is what I want for you. And that is a high visibility project. So who are the key stakeholders? Is there a steering committee involved? And who's on the steering committee? Is that somebody that you want to get, you want that people on that steering committee to see you in action? Those are the projects to get involved in. Because at the end of the day, It's not just about doing the work, it's also about making sure that others see the value you bring to your role and the organisation. And that's what I want for you. I want you to be valuable and valued. And I want you to be visible. So, I hope those 5 tips were helpful, that they've given you some food for thought of things that you could do to make your invisible work visible. And I will look forward to sharing my jet-setting photos on social media and bringing you another episode in a couple of weeks when I'm back from beautiful Canada. Thank you for listening. And once again, if you have time, please leave me a rating and review because it helps other assistants who want to assist with impact and elevate their effectiveness find little old me. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to today's show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see the show notes, head over to my website. It would be great if you haven't already done so. If you enjoyed the show, if you could kindly go to iTunes and leave a review. It helps other people find the show. Thanks for listening and have a great week.